G'day, I'm Martyn and this is The Truth of It. And on today's program, I'm going to be discussing born alive and left to die, the shocking practice of late-term abortion around Australia and indeed probably across the entire Western world, and the legislation that's been introduced to fix it. Second up, we'll be going into the Biden-Harris presidency after a little over 1 month. What's the report card? How are they doing? First up, I'm going to talk about born alive and left to die. Now, when I was in Adelaide recently at the Walk for Life down there, which was huge, there was a midwife who took to the stage to tell a story. And she told us about one time when she was present during a late-term abortion. The supposedly dead baby was placed on a table and she was asked to photograph it for record-keeping purposes. But the camera flash startled that baby and it began to breathe. It was alive. And not knowing what to do, she, in fact, having no power to do anything really, she put that baby into a nearby storeroom and she checked on it over the course of hours until it slowly died, alone, without medical care. Now, everyone is tempted at this point to assume that that's an incredibly rare situation, it's an outlier of a case and it's a tragedy. It is not rare as we would like to think it is. Researchers at the Parliamentary Library, so this is a very credible source at the Federal Parliamentary Library, have found the data from Victoria, Queensland and Western Australia, and those are the states which keep sufficient records to identify cases like this. The other states don't. But if you take, for example, Victoria, between 2012 and 2016, so 5 years, there was 1,626 late-term abortions, of which about 200 resulted in live births. Now, that is well over 10%. In Queensland, between 2005 and 2015, a period in which there were much more restrictive abortion laws than in Victoria, there were more than 200 born alive and left to die cases. Now, as I said, Victoria is higher because it had some of the world's most liberal abortion laws up to the day and point of birth for pretty much any reason since 2008. Now, the reality is that now Queensland, New South Wales, South Australia, ACT and Tasmania have all got similar abortion legislation. And so you can imagine that the numbers have come up. Guidance from Queensland Health says to practitioners, quote, if a live birth occurs, do not provide life-sustaining treatment. Document the date and time when the end of life occurs. In other words, wait for it to die. The South Australian Attorney General's Department produced an FAQ about late-term abortion recently. This was because of the debate down there, because they've just legislated abortion to birth, and it included the following statement about what happens when a baby is born alive despite an attempted abortion. It said, quote, it is wrapped in a blanket and the mother is given the opportunity to hold the baby as it dies. Now, the midwife story I just mentioned was a lady from South Australia, and of course the mother doesn't hold the baby as it dies because she desired to abort it. It's fairly confronting, a fairly unusual thing. It usually dies by itself and that opportunity is not taken up. Now, here's the reality. I'm quite sure that if this was happening to newborn puppies or whales or wombats, the animal rights outcry would be off the charts. But strangely, and I'll never understand this, the humane treatment of animals does not always equate to the humane treatment of human beings. In fact, our case shows an upside-down view of creation, where animals are elevated above people in so many cases. And it's one of so many moral reversals that have happened in the Western mind in decades past and today. These children are living, breathing, pain-capable, capable of responding to affection. They are whole human beings, born, live, breathing. George Christensen, the Member of Parliament for Dawson in North Queensland, has had a new bill drafted to resolve this. It's called the Human Rights Children Born Alive Bill 2021. And it makes this simple change to the law. A child which is born alive is to be rendered medical care as if it were a child born alive otherwise than as a result of an attempted abortion. Because what's happening is this. A child is born alive, breathing, but it is left to die as a result of some tortured and morally despicable reasoning, namely the idea that the child is not worthy of life, not worthy of saving, not worthy of healthcare until we decide that we want that child. But because the decision has been made that it is unwanted, we can somehow change the whole universe of morals to depend not on truth but on what we want. It's one of many examples where we are making ourselves gods these days. And we're doing so because we want to live as we please, and we care insufficiently and inadequately about the suffering we inflict on others in the process. because we're the centre of our world. It's a diabolical lie. It's the lie of Satan, namely to be as gods, knowing good and evil, right, in Genesis. In other words, to be like God, to actually have that power to arrogate to yourself what is right and what is wrong. That's what we want to do. But let me make this point. We think we get away with this kind of thing. We think we can just kill children and go on our merry way, living for ourselves, and all's going to be well. Well, Romans 1 says that when we do this, when we make ourselves gods and when we live as we please, we don't get away with it. It says that we bear in ourselves the due penalty for our error. I think that's a somewhat cryptic statement to the effect that we carry in ourselves the guilt, the consequences of evil. There is no consequence-free evil act. None. Even when we think we get away with it because we're in a modern world and we can change technology and change the rules and do as we please, we think we get away with it. We don't. And I think that people, especially women, but also often men who are involved in these decisions, when they make the tragic decision to abort, especially in a dreadful situation of a late-term abortion, they live with the scars of that for the rest of their lives, whether they like it or not. Some recognise it, they repent of it, praise God for that. There's restoration always in Christ. Others recognise it and they spiral into hopelessness and depression. Others do not recognise it, but they have, probably for the rest of their life, some giveaway behaviours. And one of those giveaway behaviours, I really think that what drives so many of these people who are so zealous in their enforcement and their promotion of freely available, carte blanche abortion to the day of birth for any reason, so much of it is to declare to the world that what they did or what they were complicit in was not wrong. And to somehow have this tortured catharsis of guilt in advancing this cause. Nothing is right simply because you did it. Nothing is right simply because you said it was right. We're making another grave error, another great reversal, a moral reversal. We are forgetting that we are creatures. We are not gods. We have no power to say what is right and what is wrong. We only have the obligation to respect what is right and what is wrong. And when we don't, there's great pain. And that's the reality. That's why the pro-life cause, people say, oh, but why do you just go against abortion or you don't say compassionate things about support for women and children, etc. Of course we do all of those things. And whenever I go to rallies, I can't believe how many people there are who are deeply involved in pro-life and pro-family and humanitarian work. It's absolutely incredible. Of course we do all of those things. But simply opposing abortion is itself compassionate. Because we've forgotten that evil has consequences. We've forgotten that evil wreaks havoc on people's conscience, on their guilt, on their very soul, and on the world. And you think of the people who suffer. And yeah, they're too small, too little, too insignificant for us to really notice or care about. We can shut them in storerooms and let them die. And nobody knows. It doesn't make it right. And it doesn't mean that there's not grave and horrendous consequences as a result of that. The International Convention, well, not just for the person, but for others, for children, for example. Article 6 of the International Convention on the Rights of the Child, to which Australia is a signatory, says this. It says, Article 6 says, states parties recognise that every child has an inherent right to life. States parties shall ensure that to the maximum extent possible that the survival and development of States parties shall ensure to the maximum extent possible the survival and development of the child. And in the preamble of that same convention, it says the child, by reason of his physical and mental immaturity, needs special safeguards and care, including appropriate legal protection before as well as after birth. We've signed up to that covenant. It's a major international human rights covenant. Or the major human rights covenant around the world at the UN level is the ICCPR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Article 6, it says, every human being has the inherent right to life. This right shall be protected by law. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his life. So Australia is in breach of our international obligations. We're in breach, actually, of morality as well, and also we're defying God as well. So George Christensen's bill does a good thing, in my view. It makes something clear. It says a child is a living child regardless of how you or I feel about it. And it's unthinkable that we have to clarify such a thing, is it not? And yet here we have it. So to support this bill, go to georgechristensen.com.au/bornalive. And just to be clear on one thing for the naysayers, because there's always the detractors who say, oh yeah, but what about? I guarantee you that there is sufficient demand in this country to adopt. Now, a lot of these children won't live because of the damage done to them in the medical process. But for those that do, there is no doubt that there is sufficient demand and more than enough demand to happily adopt every single one of them in Australian homes and good Australian families. There's no doubt. There's regulatory issues in the way of that. There's all sorts of bureaucracy in the way of that. Clear it up. These kids will find a home. I have no doubt. I mean, I've attended enough pro-life rallies to know. And I've also seen the statistics on adoption before abortion became so freely available. And there's people out there who are waiting to adopt children. Good to see the pushback begin on this dark and despicable reality. It's good to get the awareness out there, so thank you to George Christensen. And also Senator Alex Antic from South Australia. He's been a real pro-life champion in recent times around the South Australian changes and also supporting this current law. So that was the truth about babies that are being born alive and left to die in our country and doubtless across the Western world because of the absolutely abhorrent reality of late-term abortion. All right, next up, 1 month, or actually, should I say 6 weeks of the Joe Biden Kamala Harris administration. How are they doing? Well, it has been about 6 weeks, and there's really two answers to the question, how are they doing? The first answer says, well, it's really all quiet on the Western Front. We haven't heard that much, have we? It's been quiet, staid, uneventful, calm, and at one level it has been. The media writes these propaganda pieces and puff pieces on how he plays Mario Kart with his granddaughter and he goes to bed early and he occasionally puts a log on the fire all by himself and all this kind of bizarre puff pieces, almost propaganda stuff. And that's one level. Then there's another level, which is just under the surface, where things are actually actively being written and signed into law and agendas are being set, and not that much is being said about a lot of this. Because Biden has signed a massive flurry of executive actions in his first weeks in the presidency, and we can learn a whole lot simply based on what he's actually done in this short period of time. It's about nearly 6 weeks at the time of filming. Let's take a look. A general comment that needs to be made from the outset, because I can't possibly go into all of these executive orders and executive actions. There's too many. I'm going to pick some highlights. But one thing that you'll notice when you read them, and they're long and they're many, is that they are an absolute festival of identity politics. Everything is just riddled with it, even policies on mundane things like housing or regulations or staff in the national security agencies. Chock-a-block with motherhood statements about racial justice, systemic racism, gender diversity, transgenderism, queer, LGBT indoctrination, LGBT inclusion, migrants, blah, blah, blah. And then there's this healthy slathering right across the top, again, even in irrelevant places, about COVID-19 and climate change and how these are cataclysms of an epic proportion that need to shape all of American activities in America and across the world, lest we die. Especially climate change. Now, I'm not even exaggerating, and I probably will have time to read you some quotes to that effect. So we're going to understand why that's happening. Well, we're going to explain it. Let's get into it. The first thing, on day one, what did Joe Biden do? Lots of things. One of them was that he wrote a letter to the Secretary General of the United Nations to say that America will, in fact, remain a member of the World Health Organization. The Trump administration had committed to leave the WHO. I want to make this point. The Trump administration did not commit to leave the WHO because it's indifferent to global health or because it's indifferent to healthcare and managing pandemics and all the rest of it. The reason it committed to leaving the WHO was because the WHO has become substantially a communist front. How do I know that? Well, I've done a video on this. Look it up, World Health Organization on our YouTube channel, and you'll see all the data. But here's the thing. Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, who is the Director General of the World Health Organization, is a senior member, in fact, a minister in a government, a member of the party of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, an Ethiopian leftist political party, listed as a terrorist organization by many US NGOs until recently. And for those who know the naming conventions of these parties, People's Liberation Front, it's a Marxist political party. It's a leftist, terrorist, extremist political party. And there's all sorts of things in his record in the health minister role and various other things which are not good. And he's China's pick for the World Health Organization. They lobbied, they got him in because he's a complete sympathizer with the communist ideals and with Marxism and all the rest of it. And what's happened, and if you watch my video, you'll see this, all that the WHO has done since the pandemic broke out is protect China, attack America. And they've been doing this and cover up and promote the communist cause, basically. And they have been doing this with American money. They do this with Western money. And so Trump said, well, that's enough of that, and walked away. Very few people have the moral courage to do that on the global stage because the pressure on them is enormous, as we saw. and also because they just don't have the moral aversion to the Marxism and communism and statism and all the rest of it that is represented these days by the China bloc and many of these international bodies and the think tanks that they go to and all the rest of it. That's why the Great Reset is a thing, because they just don't have a moral aversion to it anymore. That's going to be a huge problem in the Biden-Harris administration for America going forward. We're going to see more of it. Enough of that. On migration, on day one also, Biden issued a proclamation to terminate the border wall construction program. He said it was not a serious policy solution. It was a waste of money. Here's the thing, illegal immigration is a humanitarian problem and it is a practical problem, okay? Now that's just simple. You've got sex trafficking, drug trafficking, child trafficking. You've got no checks, no balances or knowledge of who is coming in and why, and the massive, massive numbers. It means people are dying on the journey. It means that there's people smugglers who are doing a roaring trade. It means nobody has any control over numbers. And when people arrive in a situation of poverty with nowhere to go in huge numbers, you've got all sorts of problems with work, unemployment, homelessness, citizenship, criminality, etc. It's inhumane, it's irresponsible. Have a generous refugee take? Yes, please. Refugee intake? Yes, please. I'm totally in favour of that. Have generous refugee programs. Bring people into America, bring people into Australia, but not like this. This is ridiculous. And the border wall, people laughed at it, but hey, it's a physical barrier you can't climb. It's perfectly effective, it's going to work. But no, it's back to the old approaches, which an executive order that Biden signed describes as a holistic approach aimed at addressing root causes. And the root causes apparently can be somehow addressed by doing some kind of work in Guatemala and Honduras and all the rest of it to make it so that people won't leave those countries to come to America. Do you know why people come to America? Do you know what the root cause is? America's the richest country in the world. That's the root cause. Now, the way they're going, they might resolve that root cause as well, but let's pretend they don't. Going to Guatemala is not going to help anything. This is just back to where it was. This is the reason why people chanted, build the wall, because there's a huge problem at the southern border. And it's back to, you know, same old, same old. There's a reinstatement of migration from certain Muslim countries in another executive order. And they said that the ban of migration from those countries was, quote, a stain on the US national conscience, a moral blight, that the Muslim ban was rooted in religious animus and xenophobia. Okay, perhaps. It might also be rooted in just common sense. You know, we can't fall into this Pollyanna view of the world, which says that, you know, culture and religion and all this stuff doesn't matter. It certainly does matter. And it's not rude, it's not discriminatory, it's not bad to say that. That's an acknowledgement of the truth so that we can be wise, okay? And wisdom is a supreme Christian attribute. You've got to be wise about these things. You know, some Christians have fallen for this craziness, which is actually based in a false view of humanity, which says that people are basically good. And if you pull them out of a bad environment, I don't know how, by the way, it becomes a bad environment if people are basically good. I mean, what is it? Is it in the air? You pull them out of a bad environment, you drop them into America, and suddenly in this good environment, they're going to love it, and they're going to be great people and great citizens. Culture, religious belief, convictions, and the things people are taught shape them from their childhood. And people are not basically good. People, you know, that's why if people were basically good, you would never have to teach a child not to do the wrong thing. You'd never have to train a child to do the right thing. You have to do both of those things and expend enormous energy on doing it because kids are not basically good. They're drawn to what is wrong. It's a false view of human nature. It's a Pollyanna view of the world. It's cultural relativism, saying it doesn't matter. It does matter. It absolutely does matter. But you're going to see this where they say, oh, you know, values don't matter. What we believe isn't a thing. It's all relative, and so whatever. And it means that they'll have absolutely not the convictions to keep their own values, and they'll have not the convictions to keep bad values out. That's simply what it is. Anyway, that's a lot on refugees. Let me just quickly say one more thing, which is that there is a major expansion of the United States refugee admissions program, which I think is fine. That's completely fine. More people to come in, so long as it's within manageable limits, and so long as it's the right people coming who are going to assimilate and all the rest of it. But I want to notice the ideology. It goes on, I won't quote, there's a long quote here, but it goes on basically saying their selection process is going to be heavily geared towards people who are at risk of persecution because of their LGBT identity, especially unmarried same-sex partners, etc. It's just interesting. That's very ideological. I mean, how many unmarried same-sex partners are there in Syria? I reckon not many, right? And there might be some, and that's fine. But the reality is the most persecuted people group in the world are the Christians in that part of the world. And there's no mention whatsoever in the refugee policy of their needs and the fact that they're a minority. None whatsoever. And that's just, you know, it shows that this is ideology, not reality. It's identity politics saturated through the whole lot of these things, as I just said. Anyway, let's move on to climate. On day one, there was an acceptance of the Paris Climate Agreement, so America is back into that. An executive order was signed, restoring science, it says, to tackle the climate crisis, and promptly quotes no science whatsoever, might I add. Just makes a whole lot of political statements about science and yelling science, but doesn't say anything, doesn't quote any. And it says, in this executive order, there is an immediate pause on all activities to implement an oil and gas program in the Arctic. There is a direction to consider new regulations for emissions in the oil and gas sector. The Keystone Pipeline is cancelled, and there's other rollbacks of Trump's environmental actions. What's the result going to be? It's unlikely that the US will remain energy independent. Energy independence was a big deal. It changed a lot of people's lives in America. It made life cheaper to live. It gave industry. It gave growth. It gave jobs. And also it's a national security issue. But all of that is lost because, again, just an indifference towards the threats on the global stage at the moment, an indifference towards the need for America to be strong, a hatred of their own values, a sympathy towards the communistic and Marxist views of the world that are out there that are, putting minorities in concentration camps at the moment in China. And all that kind of stuff. So that booming industry, I think, which was genuinely changing lives and helping people, and by the way, that's what I'm mostly interested in, is people, that will shrink. And look, when things go bad on the world scale, the only reason Australia has not been living in fear and dread of China is because of America, because we signed a great deal where when China comes and hurts us one day, America will be there. But when things go bad, we're not going to think about climate change. We're not going to think about all these luxury goods like gender identity and all the rest of it. All that's going to disappear, and we're going to realise that we spent our strength on fighting these politically correct policy agendas which made us weaker, and now we're in a difficult place. That's what we're going to find, frankly. Anyway, an executive order called Tackling Climate Crisis at Home and Abroad, and basically it just goes on. I'll just read a couple of quotes. It says, even as our nation emerges from profound public health and economic crises born of a pandemic, we face a climate crisis that threatens our people and communities, public health and economy, and starkly our ability to live on planet Earth. We must listen to the science and act. That's not what the science is saying, by the way, that we're all going to die. But anyway, I won't read the other quotes, but I read that because I want to point out just how catastrophic the language is time and again. And they've got all this stuff in here. It's basically a big global rort to advance the climate on the world stage at G7 and G20, to have multilateral national partners on global sustainability, involve the IMF, the World Bank, climate finance plans for developing countries, so throw money overseas for this, establish a White House Office of Domestic Climate Policy, climate policy as part of their international foreign policies, and so on and so on and so on and so on. And interestingly, they actually put the quote, "Build Back Better" in there, which is the slogan of the Great Reset. So, and that's not a conspiracy, by the way, that's just, it is what it is. They talk about it all the time. And the truth is that this whole climate thing, what's going to happen is that they're going to use the climate crisis, and this is what the Great Reset actually says, so I might as well just tell you. I've done a video on the Great Reset, go and have a look at it for more detail, but basically what it says is, there's such a dreadful crisis on our hands in climate change, and we're driving headlong into a greater crisis, so capitalism has failed, because it's driving us into a crisis, because it's going to cause us to be extinct from the planet, and this is a horrifying reality, and we need to get on with it and move quickly to fix this, so we need to reinvent capitalism. And what does reinvented capitalism look like, do you suppose? Oh, it looks a lot like communism. Oh, funny that. So that's basically that is actually what this is all about. And that's why they keep saying "Build Back Better." It's just the slogan they invented at the World Economic Forum for this very thing. So, but here's the thing for me. This whole our ability to live on planet Earth is going to be destroyed. We're going to end the world. And in that executive order, by the way, it says something about net zero emissions by 2050, which is very, very quick. I just want to make this point. It's a godless view of the world. It's a society that's forgotten that the tenure of this world from its beginning to end has been set. And it's forgetting that God will decide when everything's over. It'll be in His good time. And it says this in Genesis 8, it says, "The Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night, shall not cease." While the earth remains, until I say so. Okay? So this climate alarmism is not Christian in any sense. not Christian in any sense. What it is, it's a battering ram. It's a battering ram of fear, actually, behind which a lot of ideology follows. And that ideology, it's basically a cloak worn by statist, centrist, communistic efforts to weaken America, to collectivize ownership, to control people, control their lives, control industry, expand the state, and so on and so forth, in the name of averting a crisis. That's what it is. So let's get real about that. Anyway, let's move on. Quickly, life. Life is, well, there's a memorandum signed on protecting women's health at home and abroad. And what this does is a few things. Firstly, Title X funds can now go to abortion providers once again. Trump administration said that Title X, which is a family planning program for low-income Americans, the money from the federal government going to that couldn't go to abortion. That's been reversed. It's now going to abortion again. The Mexico City policy is to be rescinded. What's that? Well, the Mexico City policy basically said foreign aid money cannot go towards funding abortions, and it cannot go towards consultation about abortion and counseling on abortion, all this kind of stuff. It's got to be pro-life money. And the Biden administration acknowledges that the Trump administration ramped that up even further. They've rescinded entirely the Mexico City policy, so US foreign aid and development money is now going to abortion. Also, withdrawal of the US co-sponsorship of the Geneva Consensus Declaration, which affirmed the right to life and said that there was no international right to abortion, and also committed to proactively ensure adequate funds are being directed to support women's reproductive health and reproductive rights. Right, so that's a huge step back for the pro-life cause. Huge. Also a policy statement on day 3 of the presidency, which happened to be the 48th anniversary of Roe versus Wade, which is the Supreme Court decision that legalized abortion to birth right throughout America. And here's the quote that they gave in that policy statement. In the last 4 years, reproductive health, including the right to choose, has been under relentless and extreme attack. We're deeply committed to making sure everyone has access to care, including reproductive health care. The Biden-Harris administration is committed to codifying Roe versus Wade and appointing judges that respect foundational precedents like Roe. In other words, we're going to make a federal law which legalizes abortion nationally. Wow. Not only that, but a lot of naysayers of the Trump administration made the claim that Trump didn't do that much on life. Well, the Biden-Harris administration disagrees. They said that for the last 4 years, the right to choose has been under extreme attack. Right? So they disagree. They think actually a lot was achieved for life under the Trump administration. They have expressly said they're going to promote the opposite. They're going to promote the extermination of unborn children and late-term children. Very, very sad. The last thing I'll mention on the policy area is just identity politics. There is an executive order that does a few things, but one is that it rejects gender-based stereotypes, supports gender fluidity, supports trans women in sports. This is a huge thing. A lot of you will have seen a lot of stories about trans women in women's sports, basically injuring women, winning the competitions and the records and all the rest of it. It's really pathetic. That's a huge push under the Biden administration. Huge push. Also trans women in women's locker rooms and bathrooms. Anyway, and it also places gender identity and sexual orientation at the centre of US foreign policy. There's also a memorandum advancing the rights of gay, lesbian, trans, bisexual, queer, intersex persons around the world, and this puts rainbow rights basically at the very centre of the US government's foreign policy agenda. The Obama administration was famous for this, pressuring the third world, propagandizing the third world, indoctrinating the third world, making aid contingent on third world pro-LGBT policies, all that kind of stuff. It's all back. Also, there was a proclamation. This is another PC sort of identity politics thing. There's a construction site just outside the studio, by the way. So if you hear a noise, it's the drill, which has just started up. Just for the record. There's a proclamation also made on National Black History Month 2021, and it says it's long past time to confront deep racial inequities and the systemic racism that continues to plague our nation. A knee to the neck of justice opened the eyes of millions of Americans and launched a summer of protest and stirred a nation's conscience. But also less than 1 month after the attack on the Capitol, on our very democracy, by a mob of insurrectionists, of extremists and white supremacists, a bookend of the last 4 years and the hate that marched from the streets of Charlottesville, and that shows we remain in a battle for the soul of America. It's a really long sentence. But I read that quote just to show you the ideology here in this proclamation for National Black History Month. Note that the violence of an entire year, which was widespread, systematic and severe in multiple cities, which caused unthinkable amounts of damage, which resulted in many more lives lost than the Capitol riot, which was huge. They brush it aside as a cry for justice. They excuse it. They apologise for it. They say nothing bad about it. Nothing. They say it was all about a knee to the neck of justice, presumably referring to George Floyd. There's no suggestion, no evidence whatsoever that George Floyd died because he was black. None. But there's a lot of evidence to suggest well, not to suggest, but to prove, look at Roland Fryer, who is an African-American from Harvard University who did the biggest study on this. There is plenty of evidence to prove that being black has absolutely no bearing on whether or not you die at the hands of police. But they don't care because this is ideology, right? And that violence was fine, even though it was longer, more destructive, more widespread. I mean, they boarded up all the shops in Washington, D.C. on election night for a reason, right? There was going to be mass violence, but that's a cry for justice, see? But there's one event at the Capitol, which, by the way, was wrong, but which, by the way, was unbelievably smaller than all the rest. That was white supremacy, that was extremism, and that was an attack on our democracy, and they condemn it. Violence is wrong always, always. But no, they're not about truth, they're about politics. And so some violence is wrong, other violence is fine. Let me finish with this, staff and appointments in the Biden administration. Let me just go through. So what the Biden administration has promoted is the fact that there are more LGBT people in their staff than ever before. So Pete, and I should have checked his surname, Buttigieg, whatever his name is, he's Transport Secretary, a gay married man, widely expected to become the first openly LGBT person confirmed by the Senate to a presidential cabinet. Dr. Rachel Levine is the nomination for Assistant Health Secretary, expected to become the first openly transgender federal official confirmed to the US Senate, the highest ranking openly transgender government official in American history. Levine was formerly married, having 2 children, but has since transitioned to become a trans woman following reassignment surgery and hormone treatment. Now, use your own judgment as to the gender journey of Dr. Rachel Levine. I can't say clearer than that because Facebook will delete the video. The White House staff include, quote, more openly LGBTQ people in senior positions than any previous administration. So they've got, and there's a whole list I have here of practicing lesbians, married gay men, and so the rest of it. I won't go through it. And the result of this is going to be the policies pushed in the worldview, right? What's it going to be? It's going to be very singular in its mindset and in its efforts. The Equality Act is coming, and it will make mincemeat out of religious freedom in a way America has never seen. Also, you've got Dr. Rachel Levine there talking to 3-year-olds about gender transitions. You've got the trans women in sports, how that's erasing women and hurting women. You've got all sorts of stuff. And this is an attack on people as they are made by God. This is an attack on creation order. It's an attack on the Creator himself. It is so serious. It is so serious. This is the sort of thing that's going to be pushed. And I want you to contrast the fact that Trump actually surrounded himself with Christians from the vice president on down. And I'm not just talking about, Sunday-only Christians. They were very serious, committed Christians. And it changed the policy direction and flavour of the government for the better. Well, this is going to be the exact opposite. Here is the ideological underbelly of mild-mannered Joe Biden. And we're supposed to live in a moral universe where all of this that I have just said is preferable, is more righteous, is morally superior to mean tweets. I'm here to tell you I don't live in that moral universe. I started to doubt my own sympathies towards Trump at one point because people were so strong in what a bad bloke he was. Oh, fine, I understand things he did before his presidency in terms of his, decadent lifestyle and things he said about women and all that. None of that marked the office of presidency. None of that marked his policy positions on anything, and we've got to accept that. But here you have policy. Here you have things marking the office of presidency. Here you have fundamental changes to the way that the government and the nation are going. It is really serious. We're supposed to believe that a man who flagrantly pursues and legislates all this evil in 1 month is morally superior as a choice to a man who stood against it all at unbelievable odds because one of them publicly presents as mild-mannered and the other tweets in caps lock and insults some people sometimes. I don't live, once again, in that moral universe. This is a health secretary speaking to 3-year-olds about gender transition, for heaven's sake. This is a moral revolution across all these executive orders. I mean, it hits you like a freight train. It's a moral revolution on the order of pagan Rome, and then some, and then some. It's a celebration of the mass extermination of the unborn and the flagrant promotion of it around the world with masses of money. It's a moral relativist approach to immigration and to the morality of different ideologies, religions, and societies around the world, which is simply going to mean that America is a sitting duck for ideological extremism. It's a program to weaken America in the face of global threats, which are only growing. And these are ideas that are based on lies. They apologize and defend the whole Black Lives Matter thing when it's based on a lie, that the police are out there killing black people en masse. It's not happening. It was never happening. Look at my video on Black Lives Matter, I explain it. Based on the lie that climate change means we're all gonna die, literally. Our ability to live on planet Earth is under threat. It's a lie. I mean, barely any scientists are even saying that. And so I could go on. I don't live in the moral universe where there's equivalency over these things. But I will say this, righteousness exalts a nation. Sin is a reproach to any people. And you'll see in America that was growing and going from strength to strength at one time, you'll see actually it'll start to fall apart once again, because it is the morality of policies and the actions of a ruler that matters more than anything else. It isn't, identity politics. It isn't how compassionate we are as a single value all by itself. It isn't even the speed of the economy or the growth of low taxes. No, it's righteousness. That's what makes all the difference. And there was a lot of good people in the Trump administration doing a lot of good things, imperfect and messed up as it was. I tell you what, the calculus has changed. And I'm here to say once and for all that the moral calculus is not better, it is worse. But that's all my time. That was a nice long segment on my report card on the Biden and Harris administration after about 6 weeks in the presidency. There'll be more to come. But for now, I am Martyn, and that was the truth of it. Hey, thank you so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, then make sure to hit the like button. If you want to never miss another video again, make sure to subscribe. Or you can right now watch more videos right here. Cheers.